Now, here's what I want this next hour to be. These are big races, and our votes tonight will guide the state and our communities for the next 4 years and beyond. And since there's so much happening, you might have questions, but that's good. Send them our way. You can text them to me at 903-600-2600. You can email them to news@cbs19.tv, or you can send them to us on Facebook or Twitter, and then we'll answer those questions later in the hour. But it could be a longer night than usual if you want to stay up until we know all the winners. 2 of the bigger counties in Texas stayed open an extra hour tonight, so there may be some people still in line and waiting to vote. Our Ashley Moore joins us now from the newsroom to explain what happened and what led to those special exemptions. Ashley?
David, yeah, both Harris and Bell counties have been experiencing polling issues all day long, prompting that 8 p.m. extension. Now, with some of these problems beginning before polling locations even opened. Now, over in Bell County, at around 8 this morning, 42 voting centers experienced technical issues with the check-in systems, which caused delays in opening polling sites as well as long waits for voters. Now, election officials said in a news release this morning that the issues were due to this past weekend's time change. But Harris County elections has been having issues all election day. Earlier this afternoon at the Melrose Park voting location, a City of Houston Parks and Rec employee was electrocuted, causing a temporary closure. That employee was later pronounced dead at around 12:30 this afternoon. Then at around 5:45 this evening at one of their biggest polling locations in the City of Houston, NRG Arena, 21 out of 44 voting machines went down. Not only that, but a Harris County elections judge said some polls were slow to open because they didn't have the proper election supplies dropped off, including the key to opening voting machines. Now, Harris County is a blue county, so all of these issues could delay results in the biggest election in the state, and that's for the race for governor. Back to you, David.
All right. Thank you very much, Ashley. Appreciate it. I'm joined now by Dr. Ken Wink. He's the Associate Dean of the UT Tyler College of Arts and Sciences, a professor of public administration. He also helps run the polling center that looks at all the big races and how Texas feels. So, Ken, thank you so much for being here tonight.
My pleasure.
All right, so the first thing I want to ask you is, when voters get stopped by technical issues like this, what's the process to either get relief and get more time to vote or not?
Well, I think every polling place has a plan B in case something goes horribly wrong. We see this on occasion, and one thing you can do is keep the polls open a little bit longer. We saw in Maricopa County in Arizona that the electronics were not reading the ballots, and so they have paper ballots as a backup. So there usually is a plan B in case these things happen.
All right, well, yes, thankfully these voters are getting the extra hour and will be able to make their voices heard. Thank you, Ken, and we'll bring Ken back in often throughout this hour to talk about all the big issues today. Now, we want to begin at the top of the ticket, the race for governor. Our Marangeli Lopez has been watching this race closely for us. Marangeli, what can you share right now?
Well, right now, if we're taking a look at the race, it shows Governor Abbott with a little bit of a lead right now. It's been a fierce campaign between Abbott and O'Rourke. The stakes as high as it's ever been in this race for governor. We're looking at about 33 precincts reporting. You've got Beto O'Rourke with a 47%, Greg Abbott with a 52% lead. And, you know, O'Rourke was looking to take over the governor's office from Greg Abbott, and Greg Abbott is currently seeking a very rare third term. So here's what we're looking at right now. Of course, we're seeing this right here. And Abbott, of course, is in McAllen right now. He's banking on a South Texas shift away from Democrats to Republicans. He's mostly running a campaign that's heavily criticizing President Joe Biden. Abbott promoting his border policy and promising to lower some property taxes. He did not schedule any campaign rallies yesterday or today. The same cannot be said about his challenger, Beto O'Rourke. He's been heavily campaigning all day. He made stops in Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, really encouraging voters to get out to vote to the very last second. O'Rourke has had a run on a platform to fix the electric grid, expand Medicaid, raise the minimum age for those assault rifles, and then also talking about abortion rights, school safety, and lowering property taxes, plus legalizing marijuana. He'll end the day watching those results come in from his hometown of El Paso. If O'Rourke is elected, he'll become the first Democrat since Ann Richards to take over the governor's mansion. Her term ended in 1995. But if Abbott is reelected, this, of course, will be his third term. We'll be watching this race closely as the night progresses. But for now, I'll send things back to you, David, as you look over some of the other key races in the state.
All right, thank you very much, Marangeli. We appreciate it. So it isn't just the governor, it's all the major statewide elected officers that are on the ballot tonight. So let's take a look at two of the other key races. First, Lieutenant Governor. Republican Dan Patrick has the job now. He's facing Democrat Mike Collier and Libertarian Shanna Steele. Currently, as we see, votes split pretty evenly. Patrick at 50%, Collier at 48%. Again, just 7% of precincts in so far. This showdown, though, between Patrick and Collier, actually it's a rematch from 2018 when Patrick won by 5%. That was the closest of all the statewide races. The other one that we're keeping a close eye on tonight is the race for Attorney General. The incumbent AG is Ken Paxton, a Republican. He's up against Democrat Rochelle Garza and Libertarian Mark Ashe. Right now, again, just a 1% margin. Paxton at 49%, Garza at 48%. Paxton was part of a hotly contested primary race this spring, but he held off 3 challengers, including East Texas Congressman Louis Gohmert. Now, also worth noting here, Ashe endorsed Garza 2 weeks ago, saying he didn't want to be just another option if that would prevent Garza from possibly beating Paxton. So let's bring Dr. Wink back in to talk about this race for governor. And when it comes to these statewide races, what are you watching most closely as far as a factor that might change the result?
Well, I always look at elections as if there's a context. These are not races that occur outside of a context. And so one of the things you have to look at is which party is in the majority. We know statewide Republicans have a 5 to 9 point advantage in party identification. That makes it very difficult for Democrats. And then you also have a midterm election, David, which generally does not go very well for the party of the president. So a lot for the Democratic candidates for statewide office to overcome.
Yeah. Now, were there any moments that you think during this campaign may have defined the race for governor this year?
Can't think of any single thing. I guess the big event, of course, was the debate between Governor Abbott and Beto O'Rourke. And I think Beto was very aggressive in that meeting, and he had to be. He was behind in the polls, and he had to catch up. And there was, after all, only one debate, not 2 or 3 debates. But I don't think he landed any knockout blows. I think he challenged Abbott's record pretty effectively, but I think the governor did a reasonably good job of defending his record. So I didn't see that as a major game changer.
Okay, yeah, and when you only have that one chance, you can't afford to miss any opportunities you get there.
That's right.
So then, also, Governor Abbott had a big advantage in the cash already at his disposal from being governor for several years, but O'Rourke managed to outraise him for the last several months. So do you think that made any difference?
Well, it probably made a difference. I don't know what the results are going to be. I suspect that Beto is going to lose in a close one tonight. That's what our polling suggests. But you can't win with no money. You have to be competitive. You have to buy ads. Texas is a very expensive state to run in. And so while money is not sufficient to guarantee that you're going to win, it's necessary for you to be competitive. And I think this is going to be a fairly close race because Beto was able to get his message out by raising and spending money.
All right, and then in your last poll there at UT Tyler, you asked voters if they might change their mind at all between Abbott and O'Rourke, and only 3% of people said that they would even consider it. Is that common to have so few undecided voters, or is it more common than we might expect?
Well, I think it's the new normal, David. We found that in the lieutenant governor's race and in the attorney general's race, that number was 4%. So that's consistently low. I would say in years past, we would see maybe in presidential races, which I've studied a lot, maybe 5 or 10% of people making a decision within the last week or two. But I think those days are over. We live in a hyper-partisan era where people sort of stick with their tribe and generally make decisions pretty early and don't change from it.
All right, interesting. Thank you, Ken. We appreciate it. And again, we'll come back and talk to you about some more of these issues in a few minutes.
Great.
All right. So I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that Louis Gohmert ran for Attorney General. That means for the first time since 2005, we're going to have someone new representing Texas's 1st congressional district. This one is a 2-man race between Republican Nathaniel Moran and Democrat Jamar J.J. Jefferson. As we take a look at the current results from Smith County, we see Moran up with a big lead, 78% at the moment, Jefferson only with 22% of the vote. Our Jesus Martinez is covering this race for us tonight. He's at Rick's on the Square in downtown Tyler. He joins us with an update. So, Jesus, what's happening there?
David, people are slowly starting to pack bricks on the square as the polls have closed just about an hour ago. And I'm going to step out of the way just so you can see the environment just a little bit. Among these people are other Republican candidates as well who also ran for other local offices. And David Steen, the Republican Party chair, is updating members here as the polls come in. Now, earlier, we were at the Democratic Watch Party, where we saw many other Democratic leaders, such as Cody Grace, who's running for House District 6, and Mitzi Rusk, who's also a member of the Democratic Party. And among those as well was also a young lady who isn't old enough to vote, but is old enough to support her party.
It defines our future, being able to be out here and support people that we know will help us change everything is really meaningful. And having students at our school that really support us, it means a lot. Even if they don't agree with what we think, just letting them know what's going on is really good.
Now, so far here, David, no complaints from the Republican Party as the numbers are in their favor, but that could change as the numbers come in from the rest of the polls and other precincts across our area. David?
All right. Jesus Martinez out covering the Texas 1st Congressional District. Thank you so much, Jesus. Now, we have several other guests who are going to join us throughout this hour to analyze the big races and what we're seeing tonight. So let's bring in one of them right now. This is Tim Thorson. He's the editor of the Longview News Journal. Tim, thanks for being with us this evening.
Hey, absolutely. Glad to be here.
We appreciate it. So, Tim, Nathaniel Moran has been a public figure for a while. First, he was on the Tyler City Council. Then he's been Smith County judge. What kind of person is he? What kind of leader is he?
You know, he's really exceptionally experienced for somebody that hasn't done the job. He's been a small businessman. He's been a lawyer. He's been a judge. And the work that he's done recently as judge in Smith County is the type of work I think he's had to deal with personalities. He's had to make big decisions. I think it plays very well to possibly taking over as congressman for the area.
In all of our dealings with him, he's been fairly, I won't say quiet, but reserved, which means he might be a departure from Louis Gohmert, at least as far as personality goes.
Well, what I would say about Judge Moran, I would say, I would expect someone who would be thorough, someone who would be thoughtful, someone who would be thick-skinned. And when you think about those things, look, there are very few Louis Gohmerts. Louis has always been a very visible and very vocal spokesman for his party and for the things that he believes in. I think it's fair to say that on occasion, Louis might have handled conflict with kind of a ready, fire, aim approach. That is not the approach that I would expect from Congressman Moran.
And then, Tim, how would you describe the kinds of campaigns that Moran and Jamar Jefferson ran?
I think they both ran perfectly sensible campaigns. Let's not kid ourselves. Whoever emerged from the GOP primary was going to be a heavy favorite in this race. And when that's the case, it really is kind of a situation of like, don't crash the Ferrari, right? Stay away from the big mistake. Make it clear to your constituents what you stand for, what you'll do, and let the chips fall where they may. And that's exactly what Nathaniel Moran has done. For Jamar Jefferson, I think he's done everything humanly possible to contest this race. His enthusiasm is infectious. I think he's done a fantastic job of attracting as many voters as he could. At the end of the day, though, I just suspect that the pool that he's drawing from isn't anywhere near as deep as the one that Judge Moran is drawing from.
All right, Tim Thorson from the Longview News Journal, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
All right, so we're looking at a bunch of races this evening, but of course we can't get to all of them. So the easiest way to get real-time results tonight is to text us. If you text the word results to our number 903-600-2600, we'll send you back a link to all of the most up-to-date numbers from all the big races. Now, we're going to take a quick break, but coming up in about 90 seconds, we'll look at some of the other congressional races that are affecting East Texans tonight. The boundaries have changed this year, so we'll let you know who could be the next congressional representative for which counties. Greg Abbott's watch party. Again, this is in McAllen, Texas. We're going to wait for the governor to see if he makes an appearance tonight. It may depend on what the results are. But as soon as he does, we'll bring that to you. We've covered some of the big statewide races already this evening, as well as the 1st congressional district, but there are a couple other congressional races that'll determine who represents East Texans. And since this is the first big general election after the 2020 census, redistricting led to a few changes. Texas will have 38 U.S. representatives this decade, which is 2 more than in the previous decade because of the amount that our state's population has grown. There aren't any new seats in East Texas, but the boundaries did shift a little bit, so some people will have different members of Congress. District 1, for instance, shifted slightly to the east. It runs from Tyler to Texarkana and then south to Hemphill. District 4 is mainly along the Oklahoma line and toward Dallas, but it also includes Rains and Hopkins counties. Republican Pat Fallon is running for a 2nd term in Congress. He faces Democrat Iro Omeri and Libertarian John Simmons. And if we can pull up the graphic to see what the current results are, we can see that Fallon, by the early numbers so far, looked like had 61% of the vote. Now, Fallon won the 2020 general election with about 75% of the vote. District 5 runs from the eastern Dallas suburbs over to Athens and Lake Palestine, as well as all of Wood County and parts of Upshur County. Republican Lance Gooden has held that seat since 2019. He's seeking a 3rd term in office tonight. He has a trio of challengers: Democrat Tartisha Hill, Libertarian Kevin Hale, and write-in candidate Ruth Torres, all from the Dallas area. Currently, as you see here, Gooden up to a good start. He's got 60% of the early votes coming in. Hill running in 2nd place with 39%. District 6 now includes Anderson and Cherokee counties. That is and will remain Jake Elzey's seat because he's running unopposed tonight. So District 17 is the other large congressional race that we're watching this evening. And that's the seat currently held by Republican Pete Sessions. This district covers a massive area. It includes Austin and Waco on the west, and then Lufkin and Nacogdoches on the east. So Congressman Sessions has spent 14 years in Washington, but only has represented this district since 2020. His opponent is the Democratic nominee, Mary Jo Woods. And as we look so far, again, only 6% of the precincts in. Sessions has 58% of the votes. Woods has 42. Now let's go a little bit into more depth about this race right now. Pooja Salhotra joins us via Zoom. She's the East Texas reporter for the Texas Tribune and is based out of Lufkin. Good evening, Pooja.
Hi, good evening.
So Deep East Texas has been represented by Louis Gohmert in District 1, but that's changing this year. So how much time have the candidates spent meeting their new voters?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, this race is between Democrat Mary Jo Woods and Republican Pete Sessions. So Mary Jo Woods has been fairly quiet on the campaign trail this season. I spoke to several chairs of Democratic parties across the counties in District 17, including Nacogdoches and Angelina. And they said they haven't really seen her come through at all. Several said they were trying to get in touch with her, but couldn't. So she has kind of fallen off since this summer. Sessions, meanwhile, has come through a few times. He was, in fact, in Lufkin last week speaking at an event at the Chamber of Commerce. And he has, you know, as you've said, has been representing the district for the past 2 years.
So then what was the message from Sessions about what he can do for the people of Deep East Texas?
Yeah, you know, he's pretty steadfast in conservative values and kind of emphasizes a message about the economy. He talks a lot about how Democrats are spending a lot of money, you know, outside of the country, and he's wanting to reinvest in oil and gas. And he's also talks a lot about, you know, traditional Republican values. He's very pro Second Amendment, has been endorsed by the NRA. He's very pro-life, and has also traditionally voted in line with the conservative members of Congress. So he's really talks mostly about traditional conservative values.
Then, Pooja, I want to ask you about something that you wrote recently. It was an article that you wrote about voter turnout. You heard from a lot of people who said they just weren't excited about this election. So what did they tell you as far as why?
Yeah, so, you know, several colleagues and myself were just talking to voters last week because we saw that the numbers in terms of voting turnout and early voting were quite low, especially compared to the last election. So there were a range of reasons why people weren't coming out to vote. Some people were just apathetic about voting in general. people had felt like their votes weren't being counted. Some were quite skeptical about the whole process of elections. Others were just not even sure who was their representative, who was on the ballot this year. But on the other hand, today I was at the polls in Lufkin at several different voting sites talking to voters. And, of course, people who had come out to vote today were quite excited and were passionate about issues like abortion, inflation, the border. So, we'll see when the numbers come out at the end of the night tonight and even going into later this week. But, even though the turnout was lower on election during early voting, we have yet to see what those numbers are tonight.
All right. Pusha Sahotra, we really appreciate you joining us, bringing us this insight from Deep East Texas tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We have all these experts from East Texas joining our show because we want to make sure you know what's happening tonight and why and what it means for the future. But there's so much to it that we want to hear from you. So again, we're taking your questions tonight. You can text them to us at 903-600-2600. You can email them to us or send them to us on Facebook and Twitter, and we'll try and answer them later in the hour. But right now, we're going to pause for about a minute and a half. We're about to have everyone watching on CBS19 join us as well for a few minutes.
We're here with an update on the big race for East Texas, with Nathaniel Moran versus Jamar Jefferson competing for U.S. District 1.
All right, so we have Nathaniel Moran and Jamar Jefferson. They're both after the seat that Louis Gohmert is giving up after attempting to run for Attorney General. Now, right now, the results show Moran with 78% of the vote, Jefferson with 22%. So let's head over to our very own Jesus Martinez. He's been tracking this race closely. Good evening, Jesus.
Hey there, David. That's right. I'm here on Ricks on the Square for the Republican Party Watch Party. And here with me, I have Judge Moran. Judge Moran, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
What do you make so far of the turnout here this evening?
I tell you what, there's been great turnout here tonight. Lots of excitement because we know that not just here locally, but across the state and across the nation, there's going to be big changes coming tonight for our government. We're going to turn this country around, and I think you feel that excitement in this room.
And speaking of big changes, we're getting a new congressman in Congress this year. You could potentially be that new congressman. I guess, what do you attribute your campaign so far?
Well, so excited about the possibility of serving in Congress for all 17 counties in East Texas that make up Congressional District 1. I think our message of faith, family, and freedom resonated with East Texans. You know, there's so much across the nation with respect to our economy that needs to be changed, with respect to energy independence, border security, so many issues that Americans are crying out for a change. That message resonated across Congressional District 1. We're hopeful that we're going to have a victory tonight.
Awesome. And one of your most notable endorsements was by former President Donald Trump. I guess, how did that help elevate your campaign?
Well, pleased to have the endorsement of President Trump. You know, he did so many great things for our nation, and for him to reach out and say, I want to put my stamp of approval on you, Nathaniel, for the next congressman here in Congressional District 1, meant a tremendous amount to me.
Perfect. Mr. Moran, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Awesome. David, I'm going to send it back to you at the studio.
All right, Jesus, thank you very much. Now, the race that is probably the most eyes statewide is the race for Texas governor. the incumbent governor, Greg Abbott, looking to hold on his spot as Democrat Beto O'Rourke tries to make history. The results at the moment showing Abbott with 53% of the vote, O'Rourke with 46%, but just 21% of precincts are reporting. Some other races from the state level that we're keeping an eye on. One is Lieutenant Governor. The incumbent, Dan Patrick, being challenged by Democrat Mike Collier for the second time. Collier made a bid for the seat in 2018, but ultimately didn't get enough votes to unseat Patrick. Currently, still a 6-point margin, Patrick 52%, Collier with 46%. Meanwhile, Attorney General Ken Paxton is seeking a third term, being challenged by Democrat Rochelle Garza. Paxton has recently been under the microscope because of an FBI investigation, as well as another trial that's still waiting surrounding securities fraud. But at the moment, we see Paxton with 52% of the votes in, Garza with 46%. Of course, we'll have much more on all the other races during our election night newscast at 10 p.m. Until then, we'll be posting updates online at CBS19.tv. Turnout is always a big issue for an election like this, and prior to today, it was running below the pace of the last midterms. So there were lots of efforts today to get as many people to the polls as possible. As our Ashley French shows us, that includes some seasoned voters and some who filled out ballots for the very first time.
I think the tensions are quite high compared to what I've experienced.
With so much at stake in this election,
it's time for a change for Texas. As a woman, our rights have been taken away, and I want to take a stance and get those rights back.
voters from all walks of life are making sure their voices are heard this election season.
Now that I'm a little bit older, I just feel like it's important at this point to vote, for everybody to come vote, no matter who you believe in or don't believe in or whatever, it's always important to come out and voice your opinion and to be seen and to be heard.
Local universities are also stepping in to transport students and first-time voters to the polls.
We just decided to get a couple of buses, make a bus run for a few hours to take some students to the polls so that they could vote.
Actually, I was pretty nervous. I didn't know what to expect. And I wanted to utilize all the rights that we have, that are given us, that we're born with. And I just wanted to enforce that.
No matter the outcome, Texans hope whoever wins will guide Texas in the right direction.
Regardless of who wins or who loses, we're all in it together. So let's try to show support for whichever side comes out as legitimate.
A couple of places around the state did run into some voting issues today. Bell County, which is in Temple and around Fort Hood, gave voters an extra hour because of problems with machines. And Harris County locations also stayed open until 8 because several spots around Houston had problems both with machines or just running out of paper for the ballots. So Ken Wink is back with us again. He's Associate Dean of UT Tyler's College of Arts and Sciences, also a professor of public administration. So Ken, after several years of turnout rising in Texas, we saw turnout for early voting a lot lower than it had been in the past. Any ideas why?
I was not expecting that. We felt like in our polling that both Republicans and Democrats were very energized and ready to vote in this election. I don't know if Democrats in Texas were disappointed with the favorability ratings of the president, and that drove it down. I felt like the abortion issue might be a driver of voter turnout for the Democrats, but I think the fact that early voting was low is not a good sign for the Democrats, because they generally favor early voting as opposed to Republicans who prefer slightly more to vote on Election Day.
All right, so then what were some of the key factors that were driving people to the polls this year?
Sure. Our polling suggested that the two big issues for most folks around the state, particularly for Republicans and also for independents, were border security and the economy, particularly inflation. And so they were very charged up about that and ready to go to the polls. Interestingly enough, we found that the two big issues for Democrats in the state of Texas were protecting abortion rights and also gun violence and gun control. Slightly different opinions depending on whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent.
Yeah, for sure. And then what does it say to you that Governor Abbott choosing to spend tonight in McAllen rather than Austin, and that he was in South Texas during the primaries as well?
Yeah. Well, David, I think that is a signal that Republicans have gotten the message that winning the Latino vote is going to be important, not just tonight, but for the rest of our lives, basically. And 27% of registered voters in 2020 were Latino. And we have three very close races where female Republican Latina candidates are challenging traditionally Democratic districts on the border, and those races can go either way in those three. So I think that was a strategic decision by the governor to show that we're after Latino votes.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see as the results keep coming in tonight if it pays off.
That's right.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Again, we'll chat more with you a little bit later on in this show.
Okay.
Now, so far, we've talked about all the candidates in the big races, but some voters also had bonds on their ballots and needed to decide if those were projects they wanted to pay for. So first up, let's talk about one that everyone in Smith County had to consider. The county leaders say it needs a new courthouse. And so far, 56% of the voters agree, while 44% said no. Jose Alonso joins us now from, we're going to check in with Jose Alonso in just a minute. He's there outside the courthouse. But first, we want to talk about how big an issue this is for Smith County. So let's bring in Santana Wood. She's the managing editor of the Tyler Morning Telegraph. Santana, we appreciate you joining us tonight. So there's been talk about needing this new courthouse for decades. Why do you think it took so long to put the question to voters, and why do you think that it finally happened now? Looks like we're having some trouble hearing Santana, so we'll see if we can fix these technical issues in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. So we're talking about a bond issue that voters in Smith County had to consider of whether to build a new downtown courthouse. As we can see, from the early voting so far in Smith County, about 56% of voters said they agree with the project, 44% say they were against it. Now, I believe we can now hear Santana Wood. She's the managing editor of the Tyler Morning Telegraph. Santana, can you hear me?
Yeah, David, how are you?
All right, I'm great. How are you doing?
Good.
So, Santana, there's been a lot of talk about needing a new courthouse for decades. Why do you think it took so long for voters to vote on this, and why now?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think whenever the pandemic happened, just before then, they were ready to finally put it on the ballot. And then, of course, that put everything to a halt. So I think at this point, leaders said, look, it's kind of past time. Whenever we talked to Judge Moran, he said, you know, look, the thing is, there is never a great time to call a bond election like this. And that's what held them up for the last 23 years. He did admit that the economy is not doing the greatest, but the hope is to get in front of the rising inflation, because the longer you wait, the more it's going to go up price-wise, and that shows in the projected costs over the last several years. You know, back in 2000, it was $63 million for the courthouse project. 2 years ago, it was $125 million, compared with now, you know, $160 just for the courthouse and $179 for the whole package altogether. So sure, it's going to impact the taxpayers, but the leaders just really feel like this is something that overall can help the economy, really.
And then it's hard to compete, obviously, with the platform that the county judge or the sheriff had, but how much opposition was there to this bond, and how organized or vocal were they?
Yeah, definitely. You know, having the platform that we do, David, we hear a lot from viewers and readers, and I've heard a lot of yeses, but I have also heard a lot of no's. Of course, there's going to be the people who are upset and want to preserve history, but the thing that I've heard the most is, of course, about the money. They say everything's too expensive right now as it is. You know, with gas and inflation and just in general, you know, they say it's just really not the right time to spend this amount of money. But I think what the county leaders and supporters want the naysayers to really understand is this is not taking millions of dollars to build a pretty courthouse. You know, when that fatal shooting happened back in 2005 at the courthouse, the thinking totally shifted, and it's all about the safety and security now at this point. And beyond that, there's not enough space to accommodate what is needed at the courthouse to ensure a proper judicial process here. You know, it's severely hindering that process as well. So it's really about the safety and the security, and that's what the county leaders want folks to know.
And then, Santana, last thing I'll ask you is, if this passes, and right now we're seeing voters approve, how much headache is it likely to cause when the construction begins downtown?
I mean, construction, of course, it's always going to be a little bit of a headache, but the county really, whenever they planned this, they heard from constituents, where do you want this to be so that it won't cause as much of a headache as it could? And I think that they're going to do it in pieces. First, they're just going to do the parking garage, and once that's finished, that's when they'll start to build the courthouse. So I think doing it that way will lessen it a little bit. Plus, the whole reason this location was chosen is so that Broadway can remain completely open to traffic, so that won't be affected at all. And it's not going to disrupt any downtown businesses or court operations either. So although I think it will be a little bit of a nuisance for a while, it's not as much of a headache as it could be had it not been properly planned out this way.
And then if it does pass, hopefully well worth it afterward. All right, Santana, thank you so much for joining us and giving us more insight about this project. So now we have our Jose Alonso is joining us. He's live outside the courthouse. He's been following this issue for a while. Jose, what can you tell us more about this bond proposal?
David, right now we're looking at the Smith County voters looking in favor of Proposition A. Now these are the early votes, not the official votes yet, with 56% voting in favor and 44% opposing. And the current Tyler Courthouse was built back in 1955 and was originally designed to have 2 courtrooms. Today, there are 7 courtrooms in the building, and residents have noticed the need for more space. Smith County Commissioner Precinct 1 and Smith County Judge-elect Neil Franklin says the goal of the proposal is public safety.
If it's moved into this new location, the tunnel underneath will be shorter to the jail. Just makes a lot of convenient sense, but the safety aspect of not sharing hallways, not sharing elevators from the public to the inmates to the judges and staff, that's what's truly different in this.
Commissioner Franklin also mentioned that if Proposition A does not pass, then the court will have to figure out new ways to make more space. And he also told me that being elected judge gives him 4 years to, if the proposal does not pass, gives him 4 years to talk with his constituents to hopefully get it back on the ballot in the next election. Reporting live in downtown Tyler, I'm Jose Alonso for CBS19. Sending it back to you, David.
All right, Jose, thank you so much for that. There are also a couple of local school districts that are asking voters for cash so that they can make some renovations. Our Nurali Jaiswal is in the newsroom this evening. Nurali, tell us a little bit more about the proposals from Winona ISD.
Yes, David, the Winona ISD bond is on the ballot as 3 separate propositions. These include Proposition A, which is a $13.4 million bond to improve and upgrade the Winona Elementary School classrooms and both the elementary and middle school cafeterias. Proposition B includes a $6.5 million bond for improvements to the Winona Wildcat Stadium. And Proposition C includes a $3.6 million bond for the game day field house for the Wildcats. Now, if they're all passed, the bonds would call for an estimated tax increase of roughly $4.30 a month. It's just a matter of time before we know the results. We'll continue to give you updates right here on CBS 19. For now, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Nurali. We're going to take about a 90-second break. When we come back, we'll reset and we'll look again at some of the biggest statewide races and see what the numbers show. Polls closed more than an hour and a half ago in most of the state and about 45 minutes ago in some parts, which means more and more precincts have now counted their ballots and turned in their results. So let's take another look at some of the big statewide races that we're following tonight. And we'll start at the top with the race for governor. Greg Abbott going for a 3rd term. As you can see right now, about 27% of precincts reporting so far. Greg Abbott with a 54% to 45% margin over his Democratic candidate, Beto O'Rourke. Our Mara Angeli Lopez joins us again. So, Mara, what are you seeing with this race?
Well, earlier tonight, it was actually really interesting. It was a very interesting start to the race with about 7 precincts reporting O'Rourke was actually in the lead. But now we're seeing, of course, that shift right now with about 27% of those precincts reporting. So let's take a live look right now from McAllen, Texas. That's a border town, and that's where incumbent Governor Abbott is hosting his watch party. We haven't really seen or heard from him yet today. He actually didn't host any rallies or appearances either today or yesterday. In a previous interview with our sister station in Dallas earlier this month, Abbott was saying that he wants to spend the state's $27 billion surplus next year on reducing some school property taxes. And of course, if elected tonight for a 3rd term, he will, of course, work to make that happen. He's actually also talking about his strong border policies, which is why he's in McAllen tonight. O'Rourke, he is talking about maybe raising the range on those assault rifles and different policies that, of course, he's been talking about from the beginning of the election season. O'Rourke was seen today. He was in Dallas. He was in Houston and San Antonio for some last-minute calls for people to get out and vote this evening. But, of course, we're still watching those election results come in tonight. That race has not been called yet. But if it is called later tonight and Abbott is still in the lead, he could be beginning his 3rd term in office. So, David, I'll send things back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mara Angeli. Now, along the other statewide races that we're looking at, Attorney General is another big one that we're following. The current Attorney General, Ken Paxton, the Republican, has 53% of the votes so far. His opponent, the Democrat, Rochelle Garza, 44%, but just 8% of precincts reporting at this point for this race. Then Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, the current Lieutenant Governor, has 53% of the votes so far. He's in a rematch from 2018 against Democrat Mike Collier. Collier, so far, 44% of the vote. Now, another race that we're watching is District 1 for Congress. This is most of East Texas, and this race came open because Louis Gohmert chose not to run again. Instead, he made a late decision to enter the Republican primary for Attorney General. Gohmert finished 4th, about 6% shy of forcing his way into that runoff. Paxton eventually defeated George P. Bush to make it into today's general election. But as you can see right now, Nathaniel Moran, the current Smith County judge, has 78% of the votes. Jamar Jefferson, the Democrat, has about 22% of the votes. Now, we've gone all over the big races, looked at some of the local bonds on the ballot, and we're going to try and answer some more questions about this. So Ken Wink is back with us. He's a professor of public administration at UT Tyler. So Ken, first thing I want to ask you is we've seen Democrats and some analysts say over the last several years that a blue wave is coming in Texas and that the state will eventually become a toss-up. But we haven't seen that. So how likely do you think it is that that happens?
Don't think we're going to see that this election cycle and probably not next election cycle. I think the big question mark is the Latino vote over the next 20 or 30 years. And I think neither party can take that vote for granted. Another swing vote, which is interesting over the last several years, is white suburbanites in the really large cities. To me, those are the 2 question marks, the 2 swing votes, and I think the party that can win those votes over the course of time is probably going to either remain the majority or become the new majority.
All right. Now, we've seen the results come in for governor so far, showing Greg Abbott with a fairly significant lead over Beto O'Rourke. Mm-hmm. If O'Rourke loses tonight, again, we can see right now it's a 9% margin. Mm-hmm. O'Rourke lost his Senate race in 2018 against Ted Cruz. He didn't fare well in his presidential campaign in 2020. Do you see him running for something else in the future, or what do you think his political future holds?
Well, I don't know about that. We don't know about his ambitions, but Texas Democrats have got to figure out what is the best use of their money. If you lose 3 times in a row, it may be time to search for some new talent. I have to say Beto is extremely charismatic. He's able to raise money. He may have a role to play in Texas Democratic politics, but I think if you don't broaden out your ability to recruit new talent that has successfully challenged for other offices, it's going to be an uphill battle.
All right. So aside from these races in Texas, we have a lot going on across the country, of course. So is there anything nationally that you're really keeping an eye on tonight?
Well, I'm really interested in some of the Senate races. I think there are 5 to 7 Senate races that are vitally important. I do think the Republicans are very, very likely to take over the House tonight, and so we'll probably have split government. But the Senate is really, really tight. There's 5 to 7 races, and I think it's going to be late night and maybe even not at the end of the night when we'll know about all of those races and who actually wins.
Which, of course, is just what we want, right? Another long night of staring at the computer or watching TV, just waiting to see what happens, right?
Exactly.
All right, so if we do end up with either a split Congress, which is projected with Republicans at least winning the House, we've seen some projections they might win the Senate as well. There are a few toss-ups there. If we get either a split Congress or a Republican-controlled Congress, what do you think that'll mean for the next 2 years in Washington?
Well, David, it can mean one of two things. Either nothing gets done and there's a lot of backbiting and preparing for the next election and really very little gets done. Or maybe the two parties can find some area of agreement. I will remind people that the last time the federal government balanced its budget, in fact, 3 or 4 years in a row, was when Clinton was president and the Republicans controlled Congress. And believe me, President Clinton and Newt Gingrich, the Speaker of the House, did not like one another, but they were able to curb each other's worst instincts and actually work together to balance the budget. So we would hope for that outcome.
Yeah, certainly. If they can actually agree on something and make something positive happen while there's that division, we'll take that. Now, Ken, thank you. Once again, we're going to pause just briefly here. We're about to welcome in everybody who's watching in on the air on CBS19.
Thanks for making CBS19 your election headquarters. I'm Brennan Gurley. Tonight, we're keeping a close watch on two major investments that could shake up areas of East Texas if passed. A bond on the ballot for East Texas voters is over in Winona. The school district is proposing a $23.5 million bond that is made up of 3 propositions. Nirali Jaiswal has more from the newsroom on that. Good evening, Nirali.
Good evening, Brennan. This is the first time since 2010 that Winona ISD is voting on a bond. The 3 propositions include Proposition A, which is related to elementary school renovations. Proposition B includes an upgrade to the Wildcat football stadium. And Proposition C includes improvements to the Winona Game Day Field House. Now, if they're all passed, the bonds would call for an estimated tax increase of roughly $4.30 a month. And it's just a matter of time before we know the results. So we'll continue to give you updates right here on CBS 19. For now, back to you.
And let's go and hear now in from CBS 19's Jose Alonso.
Hi, Brennan. Yes, so we're still with the early voting results. We haven't gotten any final results yet, but we are still looking at Smith County voters looking in favor of the proposed Proposition A for a new courthouse here in downtown Tyler. Now, like I said, this courthouse was built in 1955, so if it does pass, it'll be the destruction of this building to make room for the new building, which will cost $179 million in taxpayer money. And like I said, we're still waiting on the final result. So until then, I'm sending it back to you, Brennan, live out here in downtown Tyler. I'm Jose Alonso for CBS 19.
Jose, thank you. And of course, we'll have much more on other races during our election night newscast at 10 p.m. Until then, we'll be posting updates online at cbs19.tv.